On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we preview the big man position, the bigs, the forwards, the centers, all of it.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Eric Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making LOJ your first listen every day. Thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. We're going to be breaking down the forward center position, the bigs, I guess you could call it, for KU basketball. Projected roles is the position group better, worse, or the same to where it was a season ago. And we'll finish up with a little KU football. What would be a good second half record over these final 6 games for KU football? And what am I projecting that they go over this back half of the slate? Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. So, Kansas basketball gets ready to, start the season this Friday with Late Night in the Fog. We got the KU Arkansas exhibition the following Friday. We've gotten our guard preview out of the way. We've gotten our wing preview out of the way. Check those out. Thank you to the everydayers if you already have. Let's get to the big men on today's episode of the show. Let's start with the players as part of this group. Could have considered KJ Adams a wing if he's playing all his minutes at the 4, but we considered him a big for this point because I view him as more of a 4-5 than a 3-4, and I think wings, you have to be somewhere in that 2 through 4 range. I think KJ is more of a big man. So KJ at 107 games played, 69 career starts, comes back with 846 points, well on pace to get over 1,000 for his career, 341 rebounds, up to 12.6 points per game last season. I think that's being slept on a little bit. I mean, guys who average 12.6 points per game then come back for their senior season under Bill Self, and a lot of times you see them average 15, 16, 17 per game. Not that I'm expecting that necessarily to happen. You have other mouths to feed, but I don't know. It feels like lost in all of this. And I've talked about it here too, the idea of what is the fit with playing too big basketball and all this sort of stuff. The idea that KJ just could be a lot better in certain areas this season. And so when you look at the biggest strengths for KJ coming into the year, you're talking about scoring inside. You were talking about dunking the basketball. You're talking about being a, momentum driver, you could kind of say, for the team. I mean, it feels like KJ is on the big end of a lot of these momentum driving plays, the big fist pumps, like pumping up the energy of the crowd. He comes up on the receiving ends of a lot of those and makes sure to capitalize on them. And I think it's important to have, some players like that on your team. And then his passing ability, like KJ is a good passer. I always feel weird when I'm like, well, KJ is a good passer for a big man. I think we just drop that, honestly. Like, he's just a good passer in general. He averaged over 3 assists per game a season ago. That was compared to under 2 turnovers per game, which, again, for a wing player, like, he's one of the better passers on the team. You could honestly make the argument that maybe besides, Zeke Mayo and DeJuan Harris, like, he's the best passer on the team coming into this year. But yeah, you look at a guy who's shooting 60% from the field over the last couple of seasons. And if you're just looking at the rim shots, like, he gets even better than that. So the biggest question here, though, is how does he fit without shooting the basketball, like, personally, him not being a shooter, because I don't expect that to be an improved part of his game this year. And with more shooters around him this year and around the rest of the team this year, with adding guys like Zeke Mayo and Ryland Griffin and a scorer in AJ Storr and, David Coit off the bench, with having more scoring around, what does that do for KJ's role? Does that make him a much more, actionable player? Does that make him a much more effective player? Or is it still the same issue where you find later in the season you need to be playing more minutes with AJ Storr or Ryland Griffin at the 4? And then the second part of this is, what level of rebounding and defense do you get? I thought that a lot of your defensive advantages of playing KJ as a small ball 5 were that you could switch everything. When he's playing as the 4 with Hunter Dickinson at the 5, I don't think that it was like a plus defensive season. I thought he was just fine on the defensive end of the court last season. And then you look at the rebounding, and the offensive rebounding 2 years ago was good. Last year, not good rebound rates really on either side of the floor. And if you're going to play too big basketball, like there are certain things you have to acknowledge you're going to give up. If you're playing too big basketball, you know you're not going to be as fast as they're athletic. You know that typically too big basketball, you're going to have a little less shooting or struggles defending ball screens or team shooting. But a lot of times you're able to make up for that because you gain back possessions, rebounding the basketball, or by playing great interior defense and offense. And for KJ, can he just be a better rebounder? I see no reason why he can't. He's, 6'7", 200, and it listed 235. That dude might be 250 of muscle. He can jump out of the gym. Like, why can't he be a guy who's getting you 6-7 rebounds per night? And if he can do that, I think that's where a lot of that improvement would come when he's on the floor. The next guy is Hunter Dickinson, 127 games played in his career, 122 starts, 3 years at Michigan, the 1 year last year at Kansas. Total it up for his career, 2,208 points, 1,148 rebounds. We talked about this on one of our earlier previews. Those don't count to the KU leaderboards all time because it's what you did at Kansas. But if it did, he would rank second all time at Kansas in points and third all time at Kansas in rebounds. In terms of, what you're looking at for this year, he would really be able to do some special things with some of those numbers. The biggest strengths for Hunter, post scoring. We know that. Overall offense, like he is an offensive weapon. Defensive rebounding, he is an elite defensive rebounder. I think positional size, like sometimes it's good in basketball to be 7'2" and be gigantic, right? Like it doesn't matter. It always cracks me up when you see it's like somebody will be like, well, that player's not good, he's just tall. It's like, well, by being tall, it makes him a good player in a sport where being tall helps you do things that are good for winning basketball games. So that doesn't matter. And outlet passing, this is something I like to talk about. Like he's a very good outlet passer, which helps in your transition game. Biggest questions for Hunter Dickinson, it's the defense against ball screens. Like I like Hunter Dickinson as a one-on-one post defender because of the strength, because of the 7'2" size. Now maybe if he's going up against a Drew Timme type, who's really like fleet of foot, quick around the rim. I think we saw this a little bit in the Yale matchup last season where they had the, I think Danny Wolf kid who's at Michigan now. If you have a center who can bring him out and dribble a little bit and use pivots and quickness to get by him, that's not always the great matchup. But if you're going up against another big man who likes to back down in the post or something like that, like he's a good defender because he's gigantic and he's large. It's the questions about how you defend in space and against ball screens and teams that can spread it out, teams that can shoot it, teams that are very athletic about how you're going to deal with those. Then you have Flory Bidunga. He is the freshman McDonald's All-American you brought in who was, I think, 2-time Gatorade Player of the Year in the state of Indiana. Was it 3-time? I don't know. It was at least 2 times. 19 points per game, 13 rebounds per game, 4.5 blocks per game in his final year of high school. This jumped out to me too, though. 3 assists per game for Flory Bidunga. I think we like to think of him as this, raw prospect who's this physical specimen who they're trying to hone a little bit. And I think to a certain extent he is, as a lot of young freshmen are coming into college basketball, let alone, big men specifically, and especially in the Bill Self system. But those 3 assists per game tell me that there is a little bit of skill to his game. Now, I don't know that skill is ever going to come around in like jump shooting or anything, but it shows you that he does have, that acumen in there, which I think is good to see. But his biggest strengths, it's his motor, it's his wingspan, it's his rim running that you kind of assume from those things. It's his rebounding, it's his shot blocking. The questions, though, come into honing those things in. You see this all the time with really good big men who are good at shot blocking. Sometimes they overdo it. Right? A player maybe slightly beats another player. You're the off-ball defender, is the shot blocker, and you go over to try to swat the shot. You try to get the shot block when it was semi-contested, and you didn't need to fully get the shot block. And because you don't get the shot block, the shot goes up. It's no good. Now nobody's there to rebound. The other center gets it and dunks it back in. Like you see that over shot blocking, or sometimes you see it like over going for the rebound. Too aggressive going for the rebound, you get called for an over and back. So part of that is just honing in that he's good at both those things, but honing in when to do it, when's the right situation, stuff like that. Getting to know the Bill Self system. I have no doubt in my mind that at some point in his career, assuming that he's at Kansas for, a couple of seasons, Flory Bidunga is going to be a monster on the defensive end for the Bill Self system. But we see it all the time where it's like, again, point to like Shaq Diallo, who couldn't find rotation minutes because, maybe he'd get a shot block here or there, but maybe he'd lose an assignment or not know where the rotation was or covering this or that because he was just a young player in the system. And Shaq Diallo probably would have figured it out had he, not had to deal with some NCAA stuff that cost him maybe practice and game time early in the season, maybe if he would have stayed for another year, whatever it is. But yeah, it's just refining all of those things that I think he's going to be good at some point. How much are they going to be right now? And then what can he bring to the table offensively? I don't know that you'll be able to play any minutes of Flory next to KJ Adams. I think is kind of where I'm at with this right now. But if you throw out a lineup with AJ Storr, Rylan Griffin on the wing, Zeke Mayo or David Coit or Shaquille Moore next to DeJuan Harris, and then you got Flory at the 5, you got Flory on the defensive end, blocking shots, grabbing rebounds, rim running, getting dunks inside. If you overemphasize the outside and opening up the floor for a lot of guys, I think that could be a really fun lineup. Then you have Zach Clemence here, 44 games played for Zach over 2 years, then redshirted last season, limited minutes per game. His biggest strengths, in theory, it's a stretch 5. Also experience in the system, right? This will be his 4th year in the system, and his offensive touch and finesse, more so than a guy like Flory and KJ, not quite as much as a guy like Hunter. But the big questions, in theory, he's a stretch 5. We haven't seen that actualized on the court yet. He's career 25% from 3. He's career 46% from the free throw line. It's a guy we've heard a lot about being able to do it in practice. He did it in his senior year of high school. For whatever reason, it hasn't carried over to games. Does it this year? And then what does the defense look like? Does another year in the system, building up, getting more experience, does it help him not get pushed around down low, be a better rebounder, be a better defender? If he can do those things, then maybe he finds a role on this year's team. But let's get to what our projected roles are. Is this position group better, worse, or the same to where it was last year? This is Locked On Jayhawks. Our episode today is brought to you by Game Time. You don't want to miss the Allen Fieldhouse energy this year, or who knows, you might be looking for a cheap ticket to get into Arrowhead Stadium this year. Well, you can certainly do that for some of the KU football games, because I'm telling you, you can get great seats for under $100 right now on Game Time for the KU Houston game this Saturday. And Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite team even easier. They have all-in prices, which allows you to toggle the feature. You can show the total up front, and with no surprise fees at checkout. That is the beauty of the all-in pricing feature, that you're not going to be shocked when you get to that checkout screen. The lowest price guarantee means Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. I continue on, and don't forget you can check out Locked On College Basketball, Locked On College Football for your second listen. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Okay, we will get into a little KU football coming up in our next segment, but first up, what are the projected roles for the big man spot for KU basketball? Let's start with this. The starters, Hunter Dickinson, obviously, KJ Adams, obviously. The only question that comes here is, do you find later in the season, once we get to January, do you find that your best lineup winds up being, AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin on the wing, where you have even more shooting out there, with Hunter at the 5 and then KJ coming off the bench? Is that even something that Bill Self would entertain, right? You have a senior coming back who's accomplished a lot at KU. Is that something that would be entertained? Or would it just, hey, if that ends up being your most successful lineup, that'll just be your closing lineup, and the starting lineup will just stay what it is? I don't know. That's a question for another day. But as far as having to roll off the bench, I feel like Flory Bidunga would be that guy. There's a chance it could be Zach Clemence. If Zach Clemence beats out Flory Bidunga, more experience, knows the system, provides a little bit more shooting, maybe can play next to KJ a little bit better in terms of being a better fit than Flory would. So how does that go? But if not, then maybe it's spot minutes for Zach Clemence. So right now I have Flory with the roll off the bench, Zach Clemence with the spot minutes for KU. And then Flory also being the future piece in terms of, okay, Hunter and KJ are gone after this season. Flory plays this year. Ideally, he performs well off the bench and gives you some good minutes in winning minutes for you off the bench, and you're able to stay at the end of the year. Yeah. Nobody, we had the best bench center in the country, right? Like that would be ideal for KU to say at the end of the season, in the same way that UConn said it a couple of years ago when they had Donovan Clingan coming off the bench behind the most outstanding player in the Final Four, in Adama Sanogo. Like, that would be the perfect scenario for KU to be able to replicate. But beyond that, you want to at least see flashes where you feel good about Flory to say, okay, Hunter and KJ are gone. We feel great about Flory being the starting 5 in 2025 to 26. that we don't have to go out in the portal and spend a bunch of NIL money to bring in another big center. And we can instead, use our NIL money, our resources, our time, our recruiting to go get a really good wing or go get that point guard replacement for DeJuan Harris or whatever it ends up being, right? So I think that would be kind of important in all this. Now, if overall, is the position group better, worse, or the same to where it was a season ago? So last year you had Hunter Dickinson. This year you have Hunter Dickinson. It's easy to sit there and say, okay, Hunter's going to be better. He's back for another year. Why would he not be better? It's also easy to look at Hunter Dickinson, what he's been the past couple of years, and that's already a All-American level player who has certain flaws that have kept him from the NBA. I feel like you're probably just going to get kind of the same guy. And to be clear, there's probably not much wrong with that. Ideally, you have a little bit more on the defensive end of the court. But, if you get the same guy, you have by being like second-team All-American, by one metric, that's saying you're a top 10 player in the country, right? So it's possible. It's possible you get a slightly improved version just by the defensive side. It's possible you get an improved version by him being the same player, but the context being better, right? More shooting around him, better players around him, second year in the system, more experience, knowing what he needs to do and everything. So, at the very least, you would say it's the same with a chance to being a little bit better. Then with KJ Adams, that one, kind of the same thing. Like you could argue it's going to be the same guy. You could argue it's going to be better. I have an easier time finding avenues for KJ to be better, like I said, with the rebounding this upcoming season. If you get more consistent with that push shot, right? If you worked on that a ton in the offseason. If you just become, by being on a team with more shooters around you, if there's more driving lanes open and you're able to drive to the rim and finish at an even higher clip at the rim than you did a season ago, where you're this like unstoppable, strong driver, that's a way you can figure it out. On the defensive end of the court, becoming an even better weapon on that end overall, right? There are ways that you could look to, but let's just say those two guys end up being the same from where you were last season. To me, I don't think it's close between Parker Brown and Flory Bidunga. And that even comes from me, the guy who is typically like with freshmen coming in, like, listen, this freshman could be good, but a lot of times you see it, with I don't know, all sorts of guys. You can go down the list of players who were freshmen who we expected big things of, right? To be studs right away, to be first-round draft picks at the end of the season. Look back to Marco Jackson last season. Look back to MJ Rice 2 seasons ago. And yes, there are examples of players, showing up, Johnny Furphy, Grady Dick, right? But it tends to be that kind of like 50-50, sometimes even like a 1-3 about how impactful that freshman was right away. Even then, I feel good about where Flory's going to be, even if there's going to be some mistakes of what Bill Self wants here or there, going through kind of that freshman system and everything like that. But I feel like you've improved that position just from an athletic standpoint in what you're getting there. And then you also have Zach Clemence, which last year he redshirted. So, maybe you don't really get anything from Zach. The fact you have another body you can throw in there that you didn't last year, that is an improvement on its own. So I think it's impossible not to think this is an improved group from where it was a season ago. Because even if Hunter and KJ are the same, I think you improved on Flory over Parker and you have an extra body. And so as we went through all these positions, we said you can make an argument it's better at guard. We said you could make an argument it's better at wing if you viewed it from the version of last year that was injured, which it was. Now, if you viewed it from last year's version that wasn't injured at the wing position, then maybe you could argue last year's was better. But again, it was injured. So you could argue that this year's is better. And now we're arguing this year's better for the big position. So point blank, KU should be a better team in 2024 to 2025. All right, let's finish up. What would be a good second half finish for KU football record-wise? And what am I predicting that they go over this back half of the schedule? This is Locked On Jayhawks. We're brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, where you can bet on the NFL action, college football action this weekend. You're getting close to being able to bet on college basketball action. You can actually get some futures for college basketball, where you can get Hunter Dickinson plus 550 to win the Wooden Award. He's actually the favorite to win the Wooden Award. How about that? I mean, if he wins the Wooden Award, jersey's going in the rafters. Like, that's just a thing. But that's a conversation you can have for another day. They're also plus 250 to win the Big 12. How about that? So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets with FanDuel. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, let's finish up here on this episode of the show. We will be back for a late night in the fog preview, as well as a KU Houston preview later in this week. What would be a good second half for KU football, and how many wins am I projecting? You look at the second half, it is definitely tougher than the first half. And before the season started, you could have made the argument that the first half was not that much, I don't know. You probably still would argue that the second half was tougher, but like coming in to the season, we thought, okay, Houston was really bad. K-State would be good. Iowa State would be solid, not top 10 team in the country. BYU didn't make a bowl game last year. Colorado, they're going to be mid. And then Baylor might be bad, right? Well, now you're looking at it and you're like, oh no, Houston's coming off putting up 30 points in a win on the road against TCU. Kansas State, still top 20 team. Iowa State, undefeated, top 10 in the country right now. They might be the favorite in the Big 12. BYU is really good. Like they beat SMU. I think BYU, I'm pretty sure, is the only undefeated team with 2 wins over current top 25 teams. I believe that is true. Among all the undefeated teams, the only one with 2 or more wins against current top 25 teams, I believe, is BYU. So all of a sudden that game's harder. Colorado actually looks like a good football team. Now, the Baylor one, probably about the same from where you thought it was from before the season started, but like the schedule was very tough there. So if you go 3-3, and that's the thing is part of this too, because the hole you're in, like 5-1 is what gets you to a bowl game. And so theoretically anything less, if you go 4-2 down this back 6, that would be a good record given the competition you're playing in. But at the end of the day, you'd be sitting at 5-7. And before the season started, if you said you weren't even going to make a bowl game, that would have been a punch in the gut. So if you're viewing this from preseason expectations, there's really nothing they're going to be able to do in this back 6 unless they go 5-1, or unless maybe they do go 3-3 or 4-2 with a win over K-State, just to, check that off the Lance Leipold era. Then outside of those, there's nothing really you're going to point to and be super happy about if you're comparing to preseason expectations. Now, compared to the expectations of right now, which is like, yeah, you could realistically win 1-2 games at the end of this season, I would view it as this. And first of all, let me say this. Would you take 1-5 over the back half if that one win was K-State? Obviously, in the preseason, if I would have said you go 2-10, you beat K-State, or if you go 9-3 and don't beat K-State, you take the 9-3. But given where things are now, I don't know. Some people might certainly take that. Now, as far as you look at this divvied out, you need to beat Houston. You have to. Like, this is your most winnable game remaining. It's even though Houston is a team with a pulse and can beat you, this is your most winnable game remaining. And so you could view it as like, okay, between the Houston game and the Baylor game, go 1-1 and then just steal one of the others. So does that mean 2-4? I feel like that's not good enough. You need to beat Houston. I think you need to beat Baylor at this point in time, because by then they might have a new coach and they might be interim coach and you're playing for a little bit of boost heading into the offseason. Win that game and then steal one of the others. Or if you want to view it as beat Houston and go 2-3 the rest of the way. So I think 3-3 the rest of the way would be a decent finish for the second half, given where the expectations have dropped to after these first 6 games, and would make you feel at least a little better, right? If you're going in the offseason 4-8, losing all those seniors, it's still not going to feel good, but at least you can point to and be like, okay, they were 4-8 with a lot of weird, fluky losses, and they got a couple, right? If you go 3-3 over the back half, that basically means that you're beating one of either Colorado, Iowa State, or Kansas State, or BYU, which that's 3 top 20 teams and a Colorado team that who knows? They could win some games and be top 25 by the time you're playing them, that you feel a little bit more confident there. As far as what I'm expecting them to go, though, I'm going to say they go 2-4. I'm going to say they win this week against Houston. I don't feel great about that prediction, but I'm just kind of at that point where it's like, I think this is a quote from like Avengers or something like that. Like it's from like Captain America. He's like, well, what's going to happen if this doesn't happen? He's like, I don't know, but I don't know. I completely butchered that quote. Just erase this from the record. But anyway, point being, it's like, I don't know what's going to happen if they lose the game. So I don't want to pick them to lose the game. Let's just say they win that one and then win one of the other ones. So, all right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back later this week. Late Night in the Fog episode preview for that, as well as some season-long props for KU basketball and KU football, KU Houston preview on today's or later week's episodes of Locked On Jayhawks. This has been LOJ. See you next time.